Hey there, GovTech Social. Back at it again with our monthly column here in the month of March. March is a month of madness if you're a college sports fan. But there's a different kind of madness that public agencies face throughout the year and certainly in March as well as other months. And that's the crisis situation. So I've invited my close friend here, Dustin, to have a short discussion about social media and crisis, the interaction between the two, and hopefully come away with some key takeaways for our audience listening in. Dustin, welcome. And my first question to you is, when I say social media and crisis in the same sentence, what comes to mind?
Well, outside of the U.S. elections, there's lots of different things that come to mind. When you think of a social media crisis, or when you think of a crisis in the context of a government agency, I mean, everything today is communicated using your phone. So just take, for example, what happened in San Marcos and Austin a few months ago with the floods that were rampant through the state of Texas. One of the primary mechanisms for getting information out was through social media, just because that's how people communicate today. So context, it's really the vehicle that we use to talk. That's where we get our information. That's where we keep up with news. It's what's fueling all of the election drama that's happening now. And it's really kind of the currency of communication today. So it's more important than ever for agencies to realize when a crisis happens, social media is going to be a platform that it unfolds on. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, on that, Anil.
Well, I agree with you fully. Social media is that link, that communications pipeline between government agencies and the public. That's why we're all on there. It's a two-way pipeline. But certainly during a crisis, the thing to keep in mind is that as a government agency, you have an obligation, a necessity to keep the public informed, to understand what's happening. Potentially rumors may be going out, so you have to think about that and how you're going to step in and correct misinformation. Many crises involve public safety, so it's critical that the right information goes out. Justin, when I came up with that phrase of social media crisis together in a sentence, and I asked you the question, immediately in my mind, honestly, was the images of the Boston Marathon bombings. I know it's a cliche example, but it was a shining light on the value of social media and government. Again, this was a few years ago, and we saw how the Boston PD really took control of the situation in terms of informing the public through the use of the Boston PD Twitter account. I believe it grew from 50,000 followers to more than 300,000. Every news article that I read, rather than showing independent photos or trying to report on the situation themselves, was basically reporting the Boston PD Twitter feed because it was such a valuable source of information. And in fact, when they caught the terror suspect, the very first announcement of catching the suspect was a tweet. It really demonstrated the power of social media. That being said, what I would remind everybody is that there are different layers or different stages of crisis situations. There are those in the news, like the Boston Marathon bombings, the San Bernardino shootings. But there's also smaller situations that happen in each and every jurisdiction all the time. Here in my hometown, where we're located in Durham, North Carolina, not too long ago, 911 went out. And this is a critical piece of infrastructure for the public to get in touch with agencies that can help them in a time of need. And what the city of Durham did is they turned to Twitter and said, 911's down, here's how you can reach us. And just that one example, I think, explains it all of how valuable social media should be how valuable it is in a crisis and how it should be integrated. So Dustin, as you work with public agencies, how are agencies approaching this potential crisis if they've never had one? Are agencies ready? If not, what might they do to get ready for the day that there is a crisis of any level?
That's a great question. I think that first of all, you got to look at what a crisis is today. So, I remember the Boston Marathon bombing and all of that, and that was kind of, just really a shining example, as you said, of how to handle a crisis using social media. But there's all kinds of other activities that are taking place today that actually constitute a crisis as well. And one actually comes from a webinar that y'all just did, where you had South Daytona post an image that didn't even live in the community, a controversial image of an animal that had their mouth duct taped, that created their own form of a crisis. So I think the one thing to realize in the public sector is that a crisis isn't just having some type of attack or having some type of natural disaster. It could be someone that lives in your community or doesn't live in your community. It could be anonymous, a terrorist organization that uses your social network and creates misinformation that creates all kinds of issues for you. And I remember one of the stats that came out of that was that they were getting up to a call a minute at their peak when that happened. And this is, you know, taking things that are happening online and actually now impacting the operations of City Hall and their website availability and all these other things just because of something that happened on social media. So I think first and foremost, just know that a social media crisis could be a whole multitude of different things. And the one thing you have to be aware of is what's happening on your own social page. So I think what I'm seeing with agencies is they're starting to pay a lot more attention to not just pushing information out using social media, but also monitoring what's happening, monitoring what people are saying, using it as a vehicle to get information back on what's happening in their community.
You're hitting the nail on the head. It's a two-way street, right? And while a situation is happening out there like the Marathon bombings or the flooding finds its way to social media, it can go the other way. And in this situation that you called out, the duct tape dog incident that many folks may have come across, it was international news. Unbelievable for South Daytona, where this image was posted on Facebook with a dog's mouth duct taped, with location tagging on, saying that person was in South Daytona. Guess what? They weren't even in South Daytona when that happened. The tagging was wrong. The location tagging was wrong. But immediately the city was hit hard on social media. Their social media was overwhelmed. They have, you know, a few hundred interactions at most a month on social media, modest presence, went to well over 10 to 15,000 comments in a very short amount of time. And to your point, Dustin, while that's not even a situation that's continuing to threaten public safety, it caused an outcry to the point where it effectively shut down the city's ability to do anything else in their communications team. They had to just quell the damage that was happening on social media, and really was a crisis for that city, for sure.
Yeah, and I think the story of how they handled it is also really powerful. When you look at, you know, they didn't just like reply to it and say, that's not in our city, and that was the end. They actually engaged with, you know, that individual and with the greater community and said, hey, we're gonna figure out what's happening. And they were very transparent in their response back. And I think that's a really powerful lesson when something like this takes place. You can't delete it. You can't say that's not relevant and hide it. You know, they acknowledged it, and they were very proactive in maintaining dialogue with the public and keeping people up to date all the way to the end of that particular event. And I think that they're a shining example of using social media, even at a, you know, smaller level, a smaller type crisis, to really proactively engage people and build trust with their community.
Absolutely. So let's wrap this up. What we're saying here is that a crisis situation, whether it's a small crisis or a big crisis, is inevitable. Now, that's not a doomsday statement. We're not trying to scare you. In fact, we're trying to do the opposite, which is point out how important social media is in those situations. So you want to be prepared for that. You want to have control of your social media accounts, know what you're going to do. You might even have some messaging prepared ahead of time for that one day when that happens. Know who the key contacts are. Absolutely, you have to be a participant in that conversation and really take control of that conversation, especially if there's misinformation. And the last thing there is, if and when you do have a crisis, maybe you've already had one, and social media played a role in it, like any other crisis situation with or without social media in the past, you want to do a retrospective to figure out what worked and what didn't. And this day and age, social media has a role to play in that retrospective to make us all better. And of course, here on GovTech Social, we'd love for you to communicate out what you're doing, share your experiences with us. We love to tell stories and help all of us get better in these situations. So that's all I've got here. Dustin, thank you for participating this month and signing out now for our audience. So we'll be back again next month with another GovTech Social column on how to empower and protect open dialogue in government.